Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is David Godwin and I'm the coordinator for the Southern Fire Exchange with the University of Florida. Today we're excited to have our guest speaker, Chuck McHugh, Fire Spatial Analyst with the U.S. Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station, Missoula Fire Lab. Chuck will be given a presentation discussing his recent and ongoing research investigating the accuracy of common weather instruments for measuring temperature and relative humidity in the field. I would like to take just a moment to share a little bit of information about the Southern Fire Exchange. SFE is a regional program for fire science delivery in the Southeast. We are a collaborative between the University of Florida Tall Timbers Research Station and NC State University. And we are funded and are proud to be a very successful partnership, part of a nationwide network of fire science exchanges that are hosted and supported by the Joint Fire Science Program. We exist to increase the availability and application of fire science for natural resource managers and to serve as a conduit for fire managers to share their research needs with the science community. The best way to stay connected with us and to receive notifications about our upcoming webinars, field tours, fact sheets, and other products is to join our email list, which you can do by clicking in the box on your screen. And finally, if you're joining us today from an area outside of the Southeast, please look into connecting with your local Joint Fire Science Program, Fire Science Exchange Network. You can see a map right there. And these are the folks that are working to connect regional fire managers and researchers to address local fire science issues and make real differences on the ground. As you can click on that link to firescience.gov, and you'll be able to find the Fire Science Exchange Network. Click on that map on their link and connect with your local folks as well. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Chuck McHugh. Chuck is a fire spatial analyst with the USDA Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station at the Missoula Fire Science Lab. Chuck started his career in 1981 as a seasonal employee on the Mount Hood National Forest, where he worked until 1989. From 1989 until 2002, he worked in Region 3 of the U.S. Forest Service, where he held various positions in timber management, silviculture, fire, and wildlife management. Currently as a fire spatial analyst in the Fire, Fuel, and Smoke Science program, Chuck works on research related to spatial data analysis, geospatial fire modeling, historical burn probability analysis, and wildfire and fuel treatment interactions and effectiveness. He provides national technical support for FARSIGHT and FlamMap and serves as a co-chair for S495 and is as a science advisory for the NWCG Fire Use Subcommittee. Chuck received his MS degree in forestry from Northern Arizona University, a BS in forestry from Utah State University, and an AS in forest technology from Mount Hood Community College. So you can see there's a number of links. You can have Chuck's contact information on there and a video that talks about some of his projects. So welcome, Chuck. We're excited to have you with us today. Looking forward to hearing about your project. In just one moment as I change slides and pull up your presentation.
All right, thanks, David. Before we get started here, I just wanted to acknowledge my colleagues on this. Larry Bradshaw, who is a meteorologist here at the Fire Sciences Lab. Him and I did the sampling work on this. He's since retired at the end of last year. And then Scott Baggett, who's our station statistician, has helped with some of the statistical analysis on this. And I look forward to hearing what you all think about this and having some interaction and hopefully working towards dispelling some urban myths regarding these types of instruments. So before I get started, I have to give a disclaimer because we're using, while we're using one specific brand of digital weather meters, we're by no means of this research or information we're doing providing any such approval for any other product or service or exclusion of others that may be suitable for doing this type of work. So have to get the legal legal out of the way there first. So there's been three previous studies that have looked at comparing kestrels or some kind of digital weather meter to values derived using the traditional sling psychrometer bellwether kit methods. The first one was this one by Lemon and Mangan in 2000, and they looked primarily at a Kestrel 3000, but they only looked at it at one set point of 45 degrees Fahrenheit and a calculated RH of 53%. While they looked at the Kestrel, they also looked at a variety of other instruments, and what they found is that the Kestrel 3000, that the temperature was equal, but that the relative humidity was about 4% lower. Then more recently in 2011, Gary White he was conducting classes and was getting a bunch of feedback from folks about not believing kestrels, and he just did some random field comparisons between his sling psychrometer and a Kestrel 3000 that he had, and he found that the Kestrel was routinely 5 to 6% below those derived using his sling psychrometer. He sent his Kestrel in and had it tested at those set points of 15, 25, and 35% RHs, and his Kestrel came back from the independent lab as matching up with those. So he found that his Kestrel was, he had a lot of believability in the results from his Kestrel compared to the sling psychrometer. And then this most recent one, again by Trevor Maynard out of San Dimas in the Technology Development Center there. He specifically addressed kestrels and has recommendations on use and discusses their feature and functions and some of the reasons for the error and differences between kestrels and sling psychrometers. But he doesn't he did no comparisons on data or evaluation of data compared to a sling psychrometer to that by kestrels. So it's a really good paper that talks about how they can be used, and I highly recommend it as reading on if you are already using kestrels in the field. So why this study? So Trevor Maynard in his paper came back with this actual quote that they have a strong lack of confidence in RH data provided by digital meters, because the values from the RH meters often disagree with their sling psychrometers by as much as 20%. And then White heard the same thing, that handheld weather instruments were given consistently low relative humidity readings compared to those derived using the traditional bellwether kit method. And then these two quotes are both from White's 2011 paper that ain't from students in his classes or discussions he had with people that anytime he got a RH reading on his Kestrel, this one person simply added to the RH reading to get the correct reading. And then this one from an individual in the Southwest who said that he didn't use them because they pushed him out of his prescription window. So to me, that's kind of, all these quotes are things that need to be evaluated, and really drove Larry and I to do this work on these kestrels and compare them as best we could to try to get to this idea of accuracy and precision and how well they match up and why they might be different. So all those quotes really lead to this idea of truthiness. If you know Stephen Colbert from the Colbert Report, he had coined this term truthiness, and that it's the quality characterizing a truth that a person making an argument, you make an assertion or claim because you know intuitively, or you know from your gut, or you know that it feels right, without any regard to what the evidence or logic or examination of the facts might be. So those quotes where you're adding or you're not using because you don't believe the data compared to what you're familiar with all contribute to this idea of truthiness. So here's some field observations. These were taken in October in the Northern Rockies on a prescribed fire in the Lolo National Forest. And all the readings are done by one person. You can see that the temperatures are in red, with the diamonds being the slings, where the squares are the kestrels, and the same here for RH, only they're in green. And you can see that across this range of hourly readings across the afternoon, that the sling cyclometer temp was 1 to 4 degrees lower, and the RH was 3 to 14% higher. And so this, you would expect that there would be some difference between the digital instruments, right? You would expect to see some differences between them throughout the day, and you can see that you get them. And then even here you can see a really, really broad difference between them, between what was calculated for the RH values versus the temperature values related to what the kestrel was getting for those values. So it's kind of interesting to look at. This is a really good chart that's in the Maynard paper, and this is why I really like this Maynard paper. Talks about the electronic meters and the sling psychrometers, and then talks about the level of uncertainty and all the things that could go on with each of those instruments that could have affect what the true RH reading is. So like with electronic meters, are they calibrated? You know, are you calibrating the sensors in them? Over time, they have some drift in both their temperature and RH readings, and then user technique, which you wouldn't think of, but there are some things to consider when you're using them. But you can see by far, the more items that can introduce uncertainty into your readings occur with the sling cyclometer. Everything from user technique. So how are you slinging it? What are you getting the wick on the wet bulb? Your technique, everything involved, and then how you're reading the thermometers. I know for me, reading those bellwether kit thermometers has gotten harder to do as I've gotten older. You have to record the data. You have to know where you are elevation-wise if you're going to use the tables, and then interpolating RH values. So there's lots of opportunity for the user to introduce error into the whole process with the sling versus an electronic meter. So again, reasons why the sling might be is the wick on the bulb not clean or wet enough. So if you have an oily, dirty wick, that directly affects how it ventilates while you're slinging it, how much water it absorbs. Water not clean, right? I mean, how many people are using distilled water and carrying nothing but distilled water with them on the line, especially like when you're spiked out in a spike camp, and every day you're moving along and not getting back to camp. Again, techniques, not swung long enough you can have too high a wet bulb, or you swing it too long, and the wet bulb's starting to rebound. So that's really critical, because just depending on the combination of wet and dry bulb, just a degree or two difference in the wet bulb reading can have a significant effect on the RH that you're calculating. Not reading the thermometer correctly, calculating incorrectly from the tables, using the wrong table, or not matching up the numbers across correctly, and then using a table with the wrong elevation for the wrong elevation that you're at. So we use two different kestrels, 4500, which you might see references as a K4500, and then the 3000, which you might see referenced right here as the K3000, and how they work. So on both of them, this little pigtail is the temperature sensor, and on the 4500, this push pin looking thing is the RH sensor, while on the 3000 this is the RH sensor. And they both work a little differently. The humidity, the relative humidity increases with the increase in capacitance. So as it absorbs more, the RH value goes up. And then with temperature, it's a negative temperature correlation. So as the resistance decreases in here, it decreases with increasing temperature. So a lot of people don't know how those sensors are working, but that's basically how they're working right here. So that's the RH, temperature, RH, and temperature. So there are some issues with digital meters. The operational environment, they do need some time to calibrate. So if you've been traveling all day and it's just been sitting in your pack in the back of the rig or in the crummy in the boxes somewhere, you need to let them kind of come out and get adapted to the environment they're in. Usually 10 to 15 minutes at the max if you don't have any wind. They do need maintenance because over time, if you drop this into a porta tank full, if you were to drop it in a porta tank full of wetting agents and stuff, that could affect the sensors on the Kestrels. Dropping them, having the batteries, making sure your batteries are fresh and going, and then calibration. Every so often you need to calibrate them to make sure that the sensors are working correctly over time. And then RH, to get a real accurate RH reading, you need to avoid direct sunlight. It does need some airflow across the sensor. And again, if you have no wind and you just pulled it out of your pack, you need to give it some time to get used to the environment that it's in. So our study approach was to compare sling and digital readings in a controlled environment. So we used, like I mentioned previously, 2 of the 3000s, 2 of the 4500s, and 2 separate sling psychrometers. We looked at 11 randomized cases. We took 3 samples at each case. We looked at a range of set point temperatures, 60, 80, and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and a range of set point RHs of 5, 10, 30, and 50%. And this gives you an idea of the table of how it looks. So at 5% RH, we only looked at that at 80 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And then at the other set points of 10, 30, and 50, we tested it at 60, 80, and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So we had tried to keep it within something manageable and keep it within a range of values you might expect on fire or on prescribed fire events. Certainly it's not everything, but it's a good range of values to look at, I think. So we did data collection in 2 phases. So in phase 1 of this study, we took the Kestrels and the slings as they were. So we pulled them out of line packs, we pulled them out of bellwether kits that have been used. We inspected the units to look for damage or things that might indicate they're not working well. Like on thermometers, we made sure they swung freely. We made sure that the mercury columns weren't separated in the thermometers so that it was intact, so we could make sure there was no issues there. And then with the Kestrels, all we did was we replaced the batteries on them, so we started out with fresh batteries. And then on the sling psychrometers, we used tap water and the wicks in the condition they were in. So we did the random measurements on those combinations of RH and temperature. Then we went back and we calibrated and repeated. So for calibration, there wasn't much we could do for the slings, right? All we could do is put new clean wicks on them and then use nothing but distilled water in the second round of collection. For the Kestrels, I sent them back to NK for testing and calibration. I didn't tell them what we were doing or what they were for. We just sent them back and said, hey, we have these 4 Kestrels. can you test them and calibrate them for us if needed? And for all of them, they were within the stated tolerance of temperatures of plus or minus 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit for temperature. For relative humidity, both the 3000s were within the stated tolerances, which are plus or minus 3%. Even though one of the Kestrel 3000s was at 2.5%, so almost out of tolerance, they didn't recalibrate it and bring it down. So it was within their specs, so they left it. Both of the 4500s were outside of the tolerances for those, and they recalibrated those to the set points that they test at. So the environmental chambers. So when we tried, like the Lemon and Mangan study and Gary White study, they did it external, so they were in the outside environment. So what we did is we used an environmental chamber that we have here at the lab, and then we could, within that environmental chamber, we could set it to the range of temperature and RH combinations that we wanted to test against. So here is the, you can see the set points. So the red is the present value that's being recorded in the chamber, and the greens were the set point values. And the temperature here is in Celsius, and RH is RH in percent. One of the issues with the lab is, with that chamber, is here's where the sensors are. So here's the front door, here's the temperature sensor, and here's the relative humidity sensor in there. And so, of course, you can't very well stand up here on a table with two of you slinging psychrometers and be right up against the sensors in the lab, in the chamber. And then the other thing is our chamber doesn't have the ability to record data, so we couldn't record and store data from inside, based on the outside settings or anything derived by the chamber. And the other thing is our chamber, we're trying to it's constantly trying to set it and keep it at the set points of temperature and RH that we gave it. So here's RH on this axis, temperature in Fahrenheit is on this axis. These traces are at 1 second collection intervals. So here's RH. Here you can see the temperature trace here and the RH trace here. And then you can see where we did some testing, where we were actually collecting data at a set point of temperature and RH. And the red dots are collection intervals, where we tagged where we were making readings. So this would represent roughly a 1 hour trace of data right here. If we looked at a data range during 3 of our sampling periods at 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 5% RH, with temperature in Fahrenheit on here represented by the red, RH on this axis represented by this blue trace, and then here's 3 different collection sampling points during that time that we did. You can see how it varies over time during this 30-minute period. It's moving around, and even though we were trying to get at 100 degrees and 5% RH, you know, we roughly on average, here we were a little bit over 7, here we were about 6.5, and here we are at 6%. So we tried to do the best we could with matching up with the set points, but they were just set points that we would try to get the chamber calibrated to. So here's the instruments that we used. Here's the Kestrels that we used. We used 2 other digital instruments. One here that we could look at and see the temperature displayed within and the RH displayed within the chamber with us. And then this log tag, this HAXO8 log tag, is what we use for our measure of truth. And that trace that I showed previously with the 1 second intervals is based on data collected here from this log tag. And then it had this mark button. So we could mark when we started a collection period, mark when we ended, when we took measurements, mark when we ended a collection period. So we had a mark with each point of data that we collected. Within the chamber, we had this instrument array. So here's our log tag that we're using for recording our truth. We just had this sling psychrometer was hanging here, and all we were reading was looking at it for dry bulb. Here's the other digital instrument. Here's the 2 3000s. Here's the 4500s, and then we also looked at these a couple of RAWS sensors. So these are two Visalia 435 RAWS sensors, which were the current sensors on RAWS stations, but they're being changed out now. So they're going to a different sensor. So this was our truth. Here's the Kestrels. We had them hung in, everything hung about the same height as we were slinging, where we were doing our slinging of the sling psychrometers we were using. So temperature. I'm going to show you, with temperature I'm not going to say too much because there wasn't really much difference between them. There was nothing to calibrate, nothing to calibrate in phase. Yeah, well, we collected temperature in phase 1. There was really no calibration that needed to go on. If you remember, the temperature sensors and the Kestrels were all at within their stated tolerances. We couldn't do anything with the sling psychrometers. So this shows all the instruments that we were using, the Kestrels over here in the 3000s, and each unit A and B, each unit of the Kestrel 4500s A and B. Here's the Visalia raw sensors, and then the slings. Temperature on this axis is in Fahrenheit. Here's our log tag temperature, so from our truth. This black line would have been perfect agreement, and you can see how all the samples are clustered along this line. And it was pretty much true with phase 1 temperatures as well. If we just looked at the differences in how phase 1 average error and the phase 2 average errors. So what we did is take the log tag temperature, our version of truth, and subtracted the readings we got from the various slings and the Kestrels, come up with the difference between them, calculated the average error difference between them, and looked at them. And you can see that there's very little difference between them, between phase 1 and phase 2. They're pretty much in agreement. And any differences are really minor. They're less than not even a half a degree difference in temperature between them. So I'll show some stats that really show it well later on in the thing, but for temperature, I'm not going to really discuss any more about it for the rest of this talk. RH is a different story altogether. So this is RH for all of phase 1 with all the samples within the target RH values we were shooting for of 5, 10, 30, and 50%. Our measured relative humidity by our sample instruments are on this axis. Here's the set points we were using, and each of these lines breaks on that. And the black squares are our version of truth, and then the slings are this diamond or this square right here. So you can see, if we just look at the 5% line, here's all the calculated RH values using the sling in the 5% group. This Kestrel right here is 4500 was instrument B, and you can see that it's higher than the rest of the digital instruments in just about in the 2 lower RH values at 5 and 10%. And then you can see that even us, with Larry and myself, taking only the two of us taking the sling measurements, you can see that we even had probably some poor technique where we probably didn't get the wet bulb wet enough or didn't sling long enough, or it's showing you the effect of using nothing but tap water and dirty wicks also. So between our technique and then the dirty wicks and tap water is likely explaining some of these differences in these calculated RH values. So in phase 2, here's what all the RH measurements look like. And you can see now that 4500B, this was the one that was 4.5% out of tolerance. And after calibration, you can see all of them are pretty well lining up. The Visalias are these X and are the diamond and this X here, so it kind of confounds things. We had some technical difficulties with the Visalia instruments in phase 1, and the data didn't get recorded or off. We weren't able to offload the data off the laptops. We had some recording issues there. So we only have the Visalia data, the raw sensor data for phase 2. But you can see how what's interesting is the slings and how they've decreased and come closer to the truth. And all we did here was use clean wicks and distilled water. That's the only thing we could do different to the wet bulb. We still had an outlier here and there, but you can see that compared to the previous slide, they've dropped closer to agreement with the digital instruments. So there's the phase 1 stuff, and then phase 2 again, just to remind you of that. So that's a lot to look at with all the clustering in there. So if we just look at the sling psychrometers in phase 1, you can see where they're at. Here's our version of the truth recorded for each one of these. Here's RH is on this side, and they're broken again by our desired sample RHs we were shooting for. So now you can see that where they're higher at the low RHs, in the 5 and 10%, they're closer in the higher RHs, but we still have probably some issues with how we slung the data, how we even slung the sling psychrometer. So you're seeing the effect of probably some user error, the effect of the dirty wicks and distilled water in the phase 1. If you look at just the sling psychrometers in phase 2, so after using just changing out the wicks to clean wicks and then using distilled water, you can see more clearly how they match up even at the low ones. Some we even got right on. You can see they're still a little bit higher across the board, comparatively speaking. If we look at kestrels in the phase 1, here's that one kestrel, the 4500, that was out of alignment, that was outside the tolerance level in phase 1. So it made a big difference in that it was higher in the lower RHs. It was even out of tolerance, it was closer to the truth at the higher RHs, but it was a little bit higher at each of the lower RHs. We look at all the digital instruments, so the kestrels in phase 2 with the log tag RHs. So now you can really see the effect of calibrating the 4500B that was way out. The 4500A was out, but both of the 3000s were within tolerance. But even the one 3000 that was borderline to being outside, you can see how close it is across here. But you can see the effect of calibrating the two, especially the 4500 that was 4.5% out of range. You can really see the effect of that. So we did the same thing with the RH error. We looked at the difference between the log tag our truth measurement, and then what the different instruments we're looking at to look at the error difference between them. And this is just trying to look at them clustered by their differences in error between the truth and what the calculated RHs were. So we look at the slings, and we just look at the phase 1 data, where this line here would be perfect agreement. They're generally 5 to 15 plus 5 to 15% higher at the low RHs, and anywhere from 2 to 10% higher at the higher RHs. And that's excluding these two, which are almost over 20 and 30%. You know, they're much higher than what this cluster of grouping is down here. But you can see how the two slings, the error differences between them in phase 1. Again, just reminding folks, phase 1 had the dirty wicks, and we used distilled water. Non-distilled water, just tap water. And then here's that, looking at them again after we changed out the wicks, and then using the nothing but distilled water. You can see that they're closer, but they're still higher. They're generally 3 to 8% above the truth measurement for all RHs. Get some that are closer here at the higher, but they're still generally all higher than what the truth RH was, anywhere from 3 to 8%. If we look at phase 1 and look at just the kestrels here, you can see again, here's that 4500, how it's higher because of the 4.5% out of whack. It's a little bit closer here, even though it's still outside the tolerance levels, and at the higher RHs, it's pretty close in the cluster of all the others. But generally speaking, they're plus or minus 5% at the low RH, and minus 3 to 8% higher at the higher RHs. If we look at phase 2 after calibrating them, you can see that these down here, the red X's are the Visalia, and the diamonds are the Visalia raw sensors, and all the kestrels are up in here. Here's the 5% one we were going for. Here's in the 10%. Here's the 30%, and then here's at the 50% range here. So if we looked at the differences in the average error of RH between the phase 1 and phase 2, you can see here what the difference of just putting clean wicks and using distilled water between phase 1 and phase 2 is, anywhere from 2 to 6% better than what it was in phase 1. If you look at the 3000s, you can see there's not much change there in RH, but this is the one that's at the 2.5% that was borderline to being outside of spec right here. In the 4500s, here's the one that was 4.5% higher, so you can see the effect of just calibrating those and getting them reset to being within standards. And this one had the biggest effect, obviously. But if you look at the sling RH of the two studies that looked at kestrels, the white paper and the Lemon and Mangan, where they looked at only a 3000, the Kestrel 3000, you can see that their RH 5 to 6s is consistent with what White reported, and the difference between the 3000A and the slings is about 4%, which is in the same ballpark as the Lemon and Mangan study. So for some statistics, now we're going to break to just some quick statistics just to look at them a little differently, because you have to show statistical. We need to look at them and see if these differences are really significant or not significant from a statistical standpoint. So if we look at temperature first, so this is temperature in Fahrenheit is on this scale over here. Here's the 3000s, both 3000s at the 60% RH, both 3000s at the 80% RH, both 3000s at 100, at temperature, 60, 80, and 100, and the 45s at 60, 80, and 100, and then the sling. So it combines both units of every type across temperature. And this is their confidence intervals plotted about the mean. And if you look over here at the significance level, they're all statistically, there's no difference between them. They're not, and you can look at that from the p-values. You can also look at it by the overlapping confidence intervals. If you look at it between phases, because that first graph was across both phases, if you break it out by phase 1 on this side and phase 2 on this side, separated by this divider line, again, they're not statistically significant different across any of the temperatures, comparing between phases between instruments. And the only one that is kind of borderline-ish is this 4500 at 100 degrees, which is right here on the phase 1, and then right here on phase 2. And they're a little bit different. I haven't quite figured out why that is. It's still borderline different, but really there's no difference in how they're determining temperature between any of the units, between any of the phases. RH is a different thing. So this is the combined across phases of phase 1 and phase 2 for all the Kestrel, each of the individual Kestrel units for the 3000s, the 4500s, and then the slings, and comparing them across phases. And you can just look at these confidence intervals and plot it and see that within each phase, this temperature, the RH calculated by the sling psychrometer method is much different. There's no overlap. The Kestrels overlap in confidence intervals. The Kestrels overlap here, and there is some overlap here, but they're still significantly different. If we look at the phase 1 and compare the 3000 to the sling and the 4500 to the sling, it's statistically significant. If we compare the K3000 to the sling in phase 2, it's borderline not being different, but pretty close to being different. And then 4500 compared to the sling is much different. And then, just to make it a better, complicated, more graph to look at, I guess, if we take phase 1 and split it, and then phase 2, when you look at it this way, what you see is that the RH across all the combined units, the slings are biased higher than the Kestrels in both phases compared to the digital instruments here. In every case, the slings are higher in their calculated RHs compared to those from the Kestrel units. Thoughts so far on where we're at with this? Maintenance matters. Both in terms of your wet bulb and using the right and the wick on the wet bulb and the water, but also making sure that the Kestrels are calibrated and within tolerances. We found that the slings were almost always higher, had almost always higher RHs in the truth, and they had higher error at the lower RHs. So at 5 and 10% RHs is when it matters most from a fire behavior standpoint. We had more agreement amongst the digital instruments than the slings. And we even found some differences between the same types of instruments. And then even in a controlled environment, it's easy to get outlier sling readings. And we knew after we took those that some of those outliers were occurring, but that's part of the error of using a sling, right? So we didn't retake them to try to get it back down to where the set points or what the temperature or the RH values we were going for, because that's part of the error that comes along with using the sling psychrometer. So we, even though we knew those values were probably outliers and probably either the result of bad technique, or in phase one they were showing the combination of technique plus bad water plus dirty wicks. So we left those values in there because that's what we're trying to look at. All the statistical analysis is done, all the measurements are done. In the process of the torture part, which is the writing of the paper, we're planning to do it as a research station note, and it'll be available online. Hopefully, because it'll be available online, it'll be much easier to access and get to. And it will shorten the editing time and all that we have to go through. I have some acknowledgments. Kyle Wald, who's an engineer here at the lab, helped us on keeping the environmental chamber running. Paul Sopko took the prescribed fire data. Mark Finney here at the lab, who I work for, gave us some funding support for it to pay for the Kestrels to be calibrated and that, and some supplies. And then Bob Holland from the BLM Remote Sensing Unit and NIFC provided the data loggers and RAWS units for us. And then I gave a talk on this in 2015 in San Antonio at the Fire Ecology Conference, and they gave us this calendar. And as I was going through it, on the back page of the calendar, there was this picture. And I love this picture of the sling. It's a great picture the individual took of the sling, and it's slinging along, but the caption is what caught my eye, because it talks about, despite advances in technology, the sling psychrometer remains a reliable standard for accurately measuring temperature and humidity in the field. And agree with that with temperature. I'm not so much in agreement with that when it comes to relative humidity readings. And with that, I guess we can open it to questions.
All right. Well, great. Thanks, Chuck. And for those of us who just joined us during the presentation, my name is David Godwin, and I'm the coordinator for the Southern Fire Exchange. And we just had a presentation from Chuck McHugh with the U.S. Forest Service Fire Science Lab in Missoula on his recent research working with partners on investigating RH and temperature measurements from a variety of different handheld devices. So at this point, we would like to take the time left in our hour to address any questions from the audience. So please type your questions into the chat pod on the left-hand side of the screen. I see a few folks already have, and we'll go through and field those. So first question already on here is from Marty, and he says, could you provide some recommendations for a Fireline tool? So I'm guessing it's kind of the take-home message here.
Well, I know that within NWCG, Marty, they're looking at this very question. And the Fire Weather Committee that's headed up by Larry Van Bussum and them, and others are looking at this very thing and coming up with some recommendations and guidelines, and they're deliberating the whole thing of changing out belt weather kits and making maybe Kestrels available in supply caches in fire camp, and that you would, instead of getting a belt weather kit, you would get a Kestrel perhaps, or some other similar digital weather meter. So, you know, they're looking at that. The Kestrel 3000s are a little bit more than what a belt weather kit is right now, and they do everything that you need to do on a Fireline, except for they don't store or record data. So I guess I'm a little hesitant to say you shall or you shouldn't. I mean, to me, my opinion, looking at the data, suggests that the Kestrels are going to be better than using a belt weather kit.
We've got a few questions that have come in talking about calibration of the Kestrels. Could you talk about how that process works, if you know what, any ideas on what that might cost for folks to get that done, and then how often, did you have any indication as how often one should get their Kestrel calibrated?
Yeah, so we sent them back to the factory and had them factory set it, and for all 4 Kestrels, it cost about $800, I think, to have all 4 of them certified at the temperatures and RHs that they certify them at. Kestrel also sells like a do-it-yourself calibration kit that costs a fraction of that. It's about, last time I looked, I think it was like $80 or $90.
Yeah.
And people do that, can do that in the field. You just have to have the time to do it, you know, and because you have to do it at it's a process that I haven't done myself personally. So I've been told that it's easy to do, it's a little bit time consuming, but you can do it, and it's less cost than sending it back to NK and having them do it themselves. You know, they say that it'll drift. I can't remember the exact specs on them for temperature and RH, but every couple years, or if you drop them or damage them, something like, I think if you drop them into a porta tank and those sensors get immersed for a period of time, I don't know what that is, in the wetting agents that might be in there, you might want to consider that. Ironically, the 2 Kestrel 3000s were the older units, and they had never been calibrated either field or by the company, and only one of them was close to being out of spec. And I'm not promoting Kestrel here, but they are coming out with a whole new line of weather meters that they're marketing as fire targeted, fire specific. This way, they're not making the 4500 for sale anymore, the yellow one we had. This is the 5500 that they're coming up with that's replacing it. This is their new version. This would have been the red model, and it's pretty much the same as this 3500. And they say that they're saying that these have a little bit different sensor in them, and they're guaranteeing or suggesting that they won't drift as soon and will stay within specs for a longer period of time. And I know that the next question will be, are you going to do the same type of study with these? And we're not planning on it, but 2 weeks ago I was with Kestrel, and they were using the 4500. They were doing a study in an environmental chamber in collaboration with the University of Montana, using that instrument and repeating what we had done here at the lab, not across the same ranges of information, but they are doing this. They are doing a similar study.
We had some ongoing conversation in the chat pod while you were responding to that question, and it sounds like there may be some. Roger suggests that, having spoken with some of the folks at NK, that the self-calibration kits, the home calibration kits, may not be available anymore. So you might want to, if you're interested in pursuing that route, you might want to talk to Kestrel first, seeing if that's still an option. We had some a comment that came in asking about the log tag that's used kind of as the baseline, as the truth. If that was NIST certified, and also some question about other was a fan used to mix the air in the environmental chamber. And then he has one other question too about was a more independent cal transfer used, like a chilled mirror or a Visalad 2-point meter. So some more technical type questions about the kinds of equipment used in the chamber as well.
So For the third question you asked, no, we didn't use like what you just were asking about the chilled mirror, the bicellular dew point meter. We didn't do that. Yes, there's a fan that circulates the air throughout the chamber, so it's moving, and just the volume of air in that chamber was such that even Larry and I entering it, opening the door and entering it, because it's not vacuum or pressured, we'd have to go. We'd set our set point. We'd watch it outside of the environmental chamber on the gauges. When it got to where we needed it to be, we would then enter the chamber, shut the door, and then we would wait, a period of time before we even started our sampling routine, so that to let it come back down or get as close as it could to what we were trying to have the chamber at. The HAXO 8 log tag, yes, when I purchased it, I had it NIST certified at the set points that they set it at, I have the certification stuff for that. So yeah, it was NIST certified.
Wasn't NIST certified?
Both the log tag and the heart shape, the white one that displayed the information digitally, were both NIST certified.
Mm-hmm. We had another question from Marty, and he's asking about, and I'm not aware of this particular product, handheld Visalia. That's, I'm guessing, another handheld weather meter.
Yeah, we didn't look at that. There's at least 5, you can find multiple ones, and we only looked at the Kestrels in this case.
Another comment from Eric, and he was speaking from his experience with slings, is that there's a fair bit of variability in the slings themselves, and he said that he's found that a 9.5-inch Wechsler, which is a bit more expensive, to be a better sling for him. And we had a similar comment from Chip, who also said that he had quite a bit of variability on some Kestrel 5000s that were showing to be slower than some other slings and other equipment that they used. So it sounds like, could you talk about just the general variability there?
Yeah, I mean, I would expect going from the small bellwether kit to the larger sling, thermometers, that you would get better accuracy. And like with the bellwether kits, I think they're about 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit is about their level of accuracy. You can't get to a 0.5 degree or a 1/10 of a degree with those for sure. And then, I think there's some variability just amongst the instruments. Even, I don't know. Yeah, there's going to be variability. So, at least in our study, compared to what we consider to be the truth values, the results are what they are. Mm-hmm. I'm interested to see what they get out of the, like Kestrel shows with their data that they just did, because they had 5 firefighters who came in and did measurements using slings like the standard bellwether kit, and calculating and comparing it to the Kestrel 5500, and for sure I'm interested to see what they did or what they get, because the chamber that the university had in the Human Performance Lab is a newer and fancier chamber than what we have.
Mm-hmm. We had a question in from Bravo, and he's asking about what are the mechanisms going on when you used distilled versus non-distilled water on the wick. Do you know what that difference is about?
I think it's just related strictly to the mineral content that affects how well when you're ventilating the wet bulb, how well it evaporates and how it cools and how fast it cools or doesn't cool. It's just like a dirty wick. The wick, if it's all dirty and has oils, even from your hand, or oils from, it just gets dirty over time, affects how much water the material can absorb, how fast it evaporates as you're slinging it, and those are the elements that are going on there.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like some of the take-home message, both from your research and the crowd, so to speak, from the chat pod, that knowing the condition of the equipment is pretty critical, and the kind of care that has gone into whether it's a sling or a kestrel is a pretty important factor for managing that drift or the error that's involved. Because it looked like even with the slings in your study that doing what is the recommended procedure in terms of keeping a clean wick and using the distilled water, that alone can be quite effective.
It appeared to be the case in this case, and if you read the specs, like in what it tells you to do, it says that you should replace that wick on the wet bulb every 2 weeks, or when it becomes significantly dirty.
But it is clear that, and I know from my own experience, the slings, I'll definitely say I've hit myself in the helmet trying to sling that thing more than once. So there's definitely opportunity for user error with that instrument as well. So at this point, it looks like we've come up towards the end of our hour. So I'd like to thank Chuck and everyone else who offered some questions and comments and joined us today for this presentation. And I know that we'll all be looking forward to the final report, the fact sheet that comes out from your project, and we'll be sharing those research results with our Southern Fire Exchange Network for sure, because I think this is really use-inspired research that can make a difference on the ground. So thank you, Chuck, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for everybody's patience. Good questions. I was going to ask David if we can you capture the chat log and grab it as a text file?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll
Comments.
save that and send that to you after the fact so that you can have those. Before folks take off, we do ask, and for Chuck's project as well, if you take just a couple of minutes and click on that Qualtrics link on the middle of your screen. That's an 8-question survey, and Chuck's really interested in the folks working on this project are interested to know that if this research that they're working on in this presentation may have changed your ideas about using different weather instruments in the field. So if what you saw today might influence the kind of weather measurements you take, and if it does or doesn't, let them know. And that's the kind of information that helps them plan their projects for the future. So today's webinar was recorded, and it will be archived for later viewing on the Southern Fire Exchange YouTube channel. And also we will try and get up on frames if you can't access that at work. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and we hope that this webinar will be useful in your fire management programs. And just as a note, this is our last webinar using the Adobe Connect system. The University of Florida will be switching over to Zoom, so we will see you all in Zoom in the future. Thanks everyone, and have a good afternoon.